Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this meeting here today in an unusual way of meeting, if I might say, because there are some journalists here in Paris and in Libreville, in many other capitals of the African countries, which I will visit as of Wednesday. But we have here today stakeholders of our joint action on the African continent. And I am very happy to be able to speak here from Paris before my official visit to try and explain what we have been trying to do for a little bit more than 5 years now, and to tell you more about it, with whom, how we're going to do it. The objective is to have an easier policy and more understandable policy, and by getting all of the administrations of our partner countries to work together, but also to have a policy which rigs in entrepreneurs, all the stakeholders in sports, science, culture, you name it, in a policy which is meant to be not only between governments, but which is meant to bring in the civil societies of the African countries. We have here many stakeholders of our policy, which we've set up with Africa, and many of you are going to come along with me in my official visit to Africa, or who have even traveled with me in previous official visits. A bit of or a bit less than 6 years ago, in November 2017, in an amphitheatre of University Joseph Kieser in Ouagadougou, I started my speech by quoting Thomas Sankara and saying that there was no longer France's African policy. Now, this is still true, but it's probably not sufficient enough in view of the tremendous upheavals that we've gone through the past few years. The time I spent on the African continent is invaluable. I made 17 official visits in 21 countries, from the shrine in Lagos to the churches in Lalibela, not to mention the multiple interviews and talks I had with different African partners in Paris and all over the world. Now, I will draw no general conclusion therefrom, because there's no single African reality unless it is in our simplistic outline. I will only draw one conclusion, is that we need to be deeply humble in view of what is happening on the African continent. And this is an unprecedented situation in history. The continent needs to deal urgently with staggering challenges, consolidate the state and administration, and invest massively in education, health, employment, training, and energy transition to be able to offer a new future for the African continent. We need to invest in all of those sectors: education, health, employment, training, and energy transition, while at the same time facing more than other countries to the pressure of climate change, to the offensive of terrorism, and economic shocks, sanitary shocks and geopolitical shocks. Now, no region of the world has been faced to such a performance requirement in 1 or 2 generations as the African continent has been today. That is the reason for which, a few days away from this new official visit to the African continent, I deemed that the priority was not to give another talk on the African land, but to try, insofar as possible, to defend in the clearest possible manner what we do in Africa, and to reinforce the desire for Africa in France. This is why many African businessmen, leaders, entrepreneurs, sportsmen are here today. We need collectively to measure the challenges that are close to us, not to come up with alarming forebodings or fears. And I realized myself during my official visits, the African land is all but a land of fear and resignation. It's a land of optimism, willpower. And this closeness and this energy must inspire us to impel us to be a strength for African neighbors, and to have this unique human and existential link with the African continent. This is a blessing. If we can make the best use of this opportunity, we'll be able to connect ourselves to the African continent, which will be one of the most buoyant economic markets of the world and one of the big centers of economic growth in the future. But also because our youth is listening to music from Congo, Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, and this music is created and produced on the African continent. This is the beginning of a cultural, economic, and scientific power that is going to develop in Africa and that is going to carry on developing. So our economic growth, our exchanges, and our trade and our jobs will depend more and more on Africa. This is no good news or bad news. It's just a fact, and it'll depend on what we make out of it. So I think now the time has come to make the right choices and to know what kind of relationship we want to have with the African countries. Now, when I try and follow the news, yes, it does happen to me to try and follow the news, and to read about the qualifications of these times, which are a bit in between, and we're in a moment of transition without having fully realized, and I'll come back to it at the beginning of the transition, that we have started. Many would want us to enter a competition. So this is a competition that I consider is outdated. It's over. And this would be a trap, which would make us want to show our might and say, okay, some come into the continent, African continent, with their armies, and this is your role, and this is you try and compete with others. No, I don't believe in that option. I mean, this is the comfort of how comfortable our ways of understanding of the past are, and we show our military might, and we have our exclusive connection with leaders, and we think that economic markets are just ours because we were there in the past. We have to fight to play center stage. Now, I think those times are over. And what I believe is that is a dead end, and those who think this was the right way are those which are a bit nostalgic. And this is something we wanted to depart from as soon as 2017, but without having all the means to face the liabilities thereof. This is a chronicle of our last decade of commitment in Mali. Because of our ultimate sacrifice, soldiers have, alongside soldiers from Mali and African armies, achieved victories against terrorist groups, and I would like to pay tribute to those who have fallen in Mali. This will be a wonderful reason for being proud with our allies in Mali and those who joined it. But that was not the role to be played by our soldiers. It was not the role to be played by France to provide political answers to those who had to replace the military response. So, in spite of what we wanted, we took on a huge responsibility. And this is why, by assimilation, we are rejected by the political class in Mali, which has not managed to turn around the country. And this is a trap that we could fall into if we're not careful elsewhere. This is why I will never let the sacrifice of our military to be marred by this assimilation, and I will never let this situation be reproduced down the slippery slope of de-responsibilization and substitution, where France becomes the ideal scapegoat. So to avoid any kind of repetition of history, there's another option that we have been following for the past 6 years, and this is another option which has turned Africa into a field of competition, and to consider African countries like partners with whom we have shared interests and responsibilities. And we want to develop a new relationship which is a fair, well-balanced, reciprocal responsibility. This is the direction we set for ourselves in Ouagadougou in 2017, and we followed it. We have lived up to our commitments and faced up to our past in Rwanda, in Algeria, in Cameroon, with the new French and Cameroon Commission, which is going to start working now. And we have lived up to our commitments by reforming the CFA front and by stepping down from the governments of Ouagadougou and by showing that this currency is an African currency. You can stick to it, and ECOWAS can, if so wish, to have its own common currency. And we also lived up to our commitments by supporting the African continent faced with the pandemic of COVID-19 and its scientific excellence, and that of CDC Africa with John Nkasong and the Pasteur Institute in Dakar and the National Institute for Biological Research of Professor Muembe, whom I will visit in a few days' time. So we also lived up to our commitments by accelerating with the tenacity of Ngoni Fall and the Season Africa 2020, the change of vision in France on the African continent. And we're going to carry on with schools, and school manuals was also going to carry on with this reconnection with the creation of contemporary Africa in all of its aspects. And in France, that will be the mission of the future Maison des Mondes Africains, the House of African Ones, which will organize in next fall a forum on cultural and creative industries in Africa. And there will also be on the African continent the role of our cultural institutes, a network of cooperation with our network of cooperation, our Alliance Française, to become the crucible of this intimacy between France and Africa and this new vision on the continent. Our institutes need to be the place where everybody is welcome and all risks can be taken on. And these are the places where Fela Kuti, or the starting point of Fela Kuti, or in Kinshasa, or Papa Wembe, or the painter Moki, have started becoming more known. So that's the strength of our network that we want to carry on supporting. And we also lived up to our commitments in Ouagadougou under the intellectual guidance of Bénédicte Savoy and Fermin Sarr, and with the teams of the Quai we started with the restitution to Benin of the works of art of the treasures of Abomey. And we will go even further with the framework law, which will be put in the next few weeks by the Minister of Culture to Parliament. And with this recommendation, this framework law that was drafted by Jean-Luc Martinez, whom I thank, and this new framework agreement will determine with our national representatives and methodology and the criteria for new restitutions to the benefit of African continents, those who, the African countries who has Côte d'Ivoire has already done so. So I hope these efforts will be part of a wider European dynamic. An example thereof is the Franco-German Fund, which we've started setting up to conduct research on the provenance of African works of art in our collections. We also supported African entrepreneurship by dedicating over €3 billion between 2019 and 2022 through the initiative Choose Africa. And we're going to ramp up our efforts by specifically targeting French and African entrepreneurs who are facing levels of risk and cannot find either get a loan or raise the funds to find the capital they need. And this would allow us to find a way forward. And this will be the role of the Public Investment Bank and the French Agency for Development to carry together the new program together. So this will be our commitment. A new program will be Choose Africa 2, which will be dedicated to carrying on with these efforts. We will be de-risking things in sports and culture, and this will allow us to increase our opportunities. We will be de-risking French investments in Africa through this mechanism, and we will speed up the growth of small businesses in Africa, which are kind of in between the formal economy and the informal economy. So, following the model of what Senegal managed to do, like we started to do so in different countries, this initiative will be a lever to support the public policy for innovation.
Finally, we have laid the basis of a Euro-African axis embodied during the Brussels summit in February 2022 under the French presidency. And it is by basing ourselves on this Euro-African axis that we obtained in Paris in May 2021 the financing of African Economy Summit, the release of SDRs to the benefit of Africa, and the production of vaccines on the African continent with South Africa, namely, as I mentioned a while ago. It is also for this reason that I'm delighted that we'll be able to count on the commitment of Commissioner Thierry Breton, as well as Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen in a few days alongside us in DRC. That is the Team Europe that we want to put in place. place. So basically giving this description, I want to say just how much in the last years we have shaken up things which seemed to be complete taboos. When I was at this same university in Ouagadougou, all the students questioning me were talking to me about the CFA franc, giving back of works of art, our incapacity to, accompany entrepreneurship, African entrepreneurship. All of this we put in place with force and commitment. But at the same time, we need to be lucid. Today, we are in the halfway. It's a very uncomfortable situation. We continue to be accountable for the past with a policy which has clearly decided to change and which sometimes has lost support, which was useful, very useful, but because we want to change methods without yet having the complete results of the policies that we have launched. So accountable for the past without having convinced about the contours of our common future. That is why this visit that we're going to undertake together is so important. It takes place at a time when we're closing a cycle of our history in Africa, a cycle that has been marked, in my eyes, to two things that we're going to change, shake up, marked by, first of all, the centrality of the security and military question and the preeminence of security as a framework of everything. And this preeminence, the role that it has continued to have, you see that these last years, with a pretext used by many of our opponents, of those who wanted to push their own propaganda to say, France is then only has a security agenda. And so the objective of this phase in which we're coming into this new era is to deploy in the form of partnership security commitment so that it is part and parcel of this partnership. And I'd like to thank the ministry, the Chief of Army Staff for having done the legwork in the past to have thought of and prepared this new security policy, and I'll come back to this. And the second major change that we're going to take is to go from the logic of aid to that of investment, solidarity, and partnership. And I think it is on this condition, by continuing and amplifying the actions that have already been put in place, that we will be able to, overcome this opposition, of supposedly West and the global South. And the G7 of Biarritz was prepared with the African countries, as we did for the G20 in Bali, where we brought together all the African countries before the beginning of the work in order to endeavor together through a conversation, a permanent conversation in a way. And that's exactly the same thing that we did when we launched the Act A initiative. It was designed with the Bureau of African Union, and it's which is totally new. And we are going to consolidate this logic, the passage of the logic of aid to investment with solidarity through the summit that we're going to be organizing on the 23rd of June in Paris. This new North-South partnership, because it is with Africa, but also with India and Barbados, that we will be able to invent a new pact to draw a new international financial architecture, fighting against inequality, financial inequality, and the favor of climate transition. So the moment that we're working for means going to the very end of this change and be demanding upon ourselves, except to get rid of, once and for all, of reflexes, habits, and a language which today are, in a way, a handicap. And to adopt a posture which is resolutely clear, that of modesty, listening in, and a shared ambition. And in all these fields, realize that Africa is not, somebody's backyard or, no dictating of a framework of development, but it's a continent where we must build respectful relations, balanced, responsible, in order to together fight for common causes. Climate is one which is so very important. Defend our interests and assist African countries to succeed. And for me, these are the terms of this renewed partnership that we wish for. which is the reverse of the logic of predation, be it military or security, whether it be financial, pushed today by other countries. And in order to succeed in this model of partnership, we must, first of all, build a new model of military partnership. And that is the work that we have carried out in these last years, designing it and discussing it, working it with our African partners. Here, in the last weeks, I received all of the leaders concerned, ministers, and the CIMA have started their rounds, their tour, which they will pursue. The logic is that our model is not to be that of the military basis as it exists today. Tomorrow, our presence will be part and parcel, will be, in the framework of bases, schools, academies functioning with the French staff that will remain, but at a lesser level, and African staff will also be able to receive, if our African partners so wish, and on their conditions, other partners. In compliance with the exchanges that I have with my counterparts, this will start in the coming weeks with a co-construction, with a visible reduction of our staff and a rising staff of African partners. This means that African partners must clearly formulate their military and security requirements. And then we increase our offer of training, of accompaniment, equipment at the best levels. And this partnership will allow us to build a new model of collaboration and close involvement of our armies, which will be translated into enhanced effort by France of training and equipment. Secondly, this new partnership, this transformation presupposes that we change our way of doing and communicating of what we are rolling out. First of all, by being more responsive, more visible, and consequently more legible. We have to accept our failures, but we have to also better accept our successes. And we note that we undoubtedly have a defect that we are far too divided. And the logic, the boutique logic, wins often over that of the team. We must all act together so that it's all visible. And France, whichever be the entity, whether it's administrative or the enterprise company that bringing concrete solutions, allows the country to respond to the requirements of youth, to better educate, to respond to energy needs, climate change needs, sports. It is, of course, the French team that is keep the France that is put in place. We are not legible enough, we're divided, we're not concrete enough, undoubtedly. And so we must, in the coming days, change our method, deploy more concrete, tangible projects, and especially where our partners are expecting us to be. Education, but not only by building walls, but by increasing our offer of the training of teachers and the quality of the teachers, building an enhanced offering in the professional, vocational training request from many countries, especially in countries where we were not so much present. Vocational training, health, climate, equality, gender equality, support for entrepreneurship, culture, the digital. Through this new method, we must simplify our offer, be much more concrete and listen, work more with civil society, and bring an offering which is of a best quality possible. And to do this with the new reflexes, to go down to the arena as we did during the Montpellier summit by listening to the youth, the civil society of Africa, like the delegate minister did in the last months, and I thank her for it. And then to take on board with us all the others and to, whenever it's useful, play as Europeans or even internationally, as we will do in Libreville in a few days with a collective positioning. As of this year, the first fund of 40 million euros will be made available to our embassies in Francophone countries in order to demonstrate that we can carry out this transformation. And that is the mission I'm giving to our ambassadors, to demonstrate that our partnership is concrete and to steer a communication which is offensive, without complexes but without arrogance. We must also go to the very end of this transformation because we have interests to defend. I think, when we talk about Africa, we have to say this clearly, spell it out clearly. It is better said. We are not going to do the common good. We have common challenges. Climate change is a common shared challenge to make sure that the African find a future that is a common challenge. But we must defend interests, and that is a reciprocal, balanced move. We're not going to go to you because we're going to do it in your place because you don't know what's good for you. No. We come defending our interests, and we do it in a respectful manner with the interests of the African countries where we roll out. And the Presidential Council for Africa, every time that it has deployed its advice and rolled out its measures, and I'd like to thank its members since the beginning of 2017 for their commitment. And our interest is, first of all, democracy. France is a country which supports in Africa, like anywhere else, democracy and freedom. A country that talks to everybody, including political opponents. A country that prefers solid institutions to providential men. A country that considers that military coups can never be an alternative to free democratic elections. As African intellectuals remind us, democracy is also has an African genesis. Our role is not to impose our values, but to make sure that a network of intellectuals and civic actors give life to the democratic practices of their society. That will be the role of the Foundation for Innovation and Democracy, which was created last year in Johannesburg and which will really radiate on the whole of the continent. And I'd like to thank Professor Achille Mbembe for his proposal and everything else that he's already built with his teams and which he will continue to do. It is in this spirit that we must continue, must not give up what has that's in the interest. Has an interest that France has an interest in, which is democracy, but to do it with the African continent and the actors that are going to carry this forward, and give ourselves a new economic ambition on the African continent. Our economic partnership with the African continent is solid indeed, but I say this with the force and welcoming the presence of numerous economic delegations present here. I thank the presidents, director generals of big French groups and their presence here today. We need to be lucid on our economic presence on the African continent and the way it is seen. We are in a position that is not going in the right direction, and that is in great part our fault, because far too often we've had a logic of making of just being there just because we were France, even if we were hurting when the financial solutions were not as good, we thought we were going to continue to be taken. No, today it's a land of competition. There you have those who compete with other weapons, which I refuse, but fighting against those. When financing becomes the element of fragility for economies, that's why we fought for a framework in the G20. But irrespective of this, because I'm saying it because I've seen it, far too many of our companies today are not producing the work of best quality because it's Africa. It won't work anymore. And I say this very sincerely, and I will no longer defend companies that are not ready to fight. When the President of the Republic goes to a country or receives a leader and has 10 in front of an African leader, nobody can consider that as a mark of quality. Not the same thing as when you go to Germany or to Poland or the Gulf countries or to China. Africa has become a country of competition, and so we must wake up. In France, we must say that we have to go and fight hard. And when we get a contract, it must be delivered on time with the right quality. And if there are problems, of course, we must know clearly where the problem comes from. And I'm not saying everybody's perfect, and sometimes our African partners are not there when they promised us. And I know I can tell them, but it's difficult for me to tell them when we are not where we are expected to be. So this field is important because other countries which are less present than we were, which are not better equipped than we are taking positions simply because they're taking African countries seriously. I also wish that a new generation of French entrepreneurs, African entrepreneurs, Franco-African entrepreneurs project themselves into new cooperation and a new philosophy, which must be that of co-industrialization. That is the very sense of the Pass Africa program, and several winners, laureates are present here. It's a very important program, will help us to develop this entrepreneurship and this logic of also building, helping new stakeholders, new actors, and to make the most, after all, in a very pragmatic way, of the fact that France is strong thanks to its diaspora. There's a network of entrepreneurs who have a foot in Africa, who know Africa, have their own connections, and we must give them the capacity to help them to deploy their activity and their success in that continent, on that continent. Our interest is to also play collectively with our European allies and to position Europe as the reference partner on major subjects, that of defense and security. That's at the heart of what we are going to go over and beyond the pivot that I spoke about. And it's the same thing that we wish to do in terms of the financing of African infrastructure. It is only with this lever that we will be able to play on an equal footing with other actors, and many of you are committed in this sector. Thank you for it. Very seriously engaged. And it is with this lever that we'll be able to convince African partners to adopt the standards with which our companies can work and produce infrastructures of quality that we wish to promote within the framework of the G20. That is the logic of what the European Union has done with the Global Gateway, and that we have carried with the G7, with the World Partnership on Infrastructure, the 600 billion euros that will be rolled out by 2027. These are financial levers that are massive, but it's also a framework, which is that of the G20 that we're rolling out, which is that seriousness, supportability of financial financing, public financing of these infrastructure. That's why we must travel together, act together, speak together, and every time we mobilize the Euro-African axis, we've been there where we are expected. And then we've got assets. The strength of innovation of our SMEs, our research and scientific excellence, our universities, our military training, our artists, our sportsmen and women, our youth engaged in voluntary work, and our diasporas, as I was saying. Each of you will, see which part of the list they fit into. The good news is that it is you more than the President of the Republic who's expected in Africa, who's awaited in Africa. And that is a clear message that was given at this Montpellier summit. It is also the message that I heard everywhere in Africa, and in July last, when dialoguing with young Cameroonese, many of you were by my side, and all of them had the same questions. Where is the French youth in this partnership? Where are the schools? Where are the universities of France? Why the French entrepreneurs, do they not invest more? Why the French football team and French clubs go play everywhere in the world except in Africa? Why the French museums don't work more with us? And that is also why you will be by my side, because alone I do not have the answers to these questions. And so it's a credible answer, effective answer that we have to bring, and a long-lasting one. And this response, this answer, will only bring, and that is why I also believe that what we're pursuing for the last 6 years is very important, not just for our interest in Africa, and I believe modestly also for our answers, which are the challenges of the African continent, like what we're doing in Libreville, and I'm sure we'll come back to this during the questions, the climate and biodiversity. I think it's important for France. We will succeed. This new partnership, if we assert the African part of France, the role of our diaspora, the place of our diaspora, and that France has no reserved place in Africa. It has duties, interests, friendships that it wants to build, pursue, and strengthen, to carry out solid policies in each of the fields that you represent here. So that is the meaning of the visit and the effort that we will be rolling out in the next 4 years. Efforts promote them put in place stronger human links in the heart of this partnership, strengthen the link with civil society, and build together an agenda on climate questions, education and health, which are good for all of us. Economic, scientific, academic, sports. I have no nostalgia with regard to France, Africa, but I don't want to leave a void behind this. For myself and over and beyond my own contribution, you will be at the heart of this partnership, and your own commitment will give its full meaning to the political choices that we have made with our Parliament to increase and protect this policy of partnerships with totally new financing. This policy is not of disembodied instruments. It is a policy of solidarity. It is also a policy for the French. It is a policy that will allow us to find partnership allies to weigh on the balances of the world, on the equilibrium of the world. If we succeed in this policy next June, if we succeed this summit for a new partnership between the South and the North, that we will be able to create this big, writing of the partnership and the overcoming of the division between the North and the South. For a country like us, if we don't succeed in this, it'll be terrible, because we have related destinies, because of what is our geography, what our peoples are, and our future. Thank you. We have shared interests and responsibilities. Thank you very much. I'd like to take the questions from journalists. If there are any questions from the delegations, I'd be happy to take them as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take first question from a journalist in the room. Good afternoon, President Christian Couseno from Kinshasa. First of all, I'm very surprised that you're giving this speech in Paris and not in Ouagadougou, Dakar, or Kinshasa. Is France fearing talking to Africans from the African continent? Well, that's a smaller question. But anyway, here's my question. France is defending its values, democracy, freedom. France has often condemned intangibility or the violation of unviolability of borders. Now, is this the case now with the UN, the international organization, with Rwanda and the Republic of Congo? President Tshisekedi this morning in Geneva asked for sanctions. What is France waiting for to putting pressure on Rwanda and putting sanctions on this country, as it has done with the international community for Russia because of its presence in Ukraine? Thank you, President. Well, thank you. Your first question I tried to answer in my introduction. What I wanted to do by giving the speech here is because of the importance of the policy of France in Africa, is to give the speech from Paris, because I think it's not sufficient to say what we're doing in Africa when we are on an official visit, but also when we do so in France, because it's important for our country and our compatriots. Secondly, of course, this is a discussion that we would call before the game, quote unquote. Of course, I'm going to discuss all of these elements during my official visit. A few months ago, I discussed this once again with the African youth, and I will carry on doing so. So the discussion is not over, and I think this holding my speech or giving my speech here was a good framework too. Now, as for Rwanda, we have to the Democratic Republic of Congo, on your question, we have to call a spade a spade. What we're seeing in the east of Congo is an unacceptable regression. The offensive underway, carried out by the militia M23, under sanction of the Security Council, is a war that brings us back 10 years into the past, and it has terrible consequences for the population. I'm thinking in particular of the hundreds of thousands of displaced persons, which are in need of everything in the capital of the region. Goma is threatened. The utmost emergency is humanitarian, and we're working on this with our European partners. I, on several occasions with President Tshisekedi and President Kagame, discussed this point, and I would like to remind you of two fundamental principles. The unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Congo is not questioned. This has been our constant position, and this stance has not changed. So there are no double standards. The war in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo must not be a forgotten war. That's why I spent time discussing this matter with each one of the stakeholders, and I supported relentlessly the framework of discussions that has been set up by Kenya and Angola. And I also discussed this with the two presidents to support mediations in the region that have been initiated. We actually supported the deployment of Kenyan troops as soon as they were able to put into place, and I discussed this with different presidents to support regional mediation. I think the answer is the only possible answer is a regional answer, and I discussed this with my counterparts before going to Kinshasa. Question from somebody via video link.
Bonjour, Sophie Eyegui.
Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Eyegui. I'm a journalist in Libreville, Gabon, for TV+. My question is, do you understand that a few months before presidential elections, with the anti-France sentiment here in Western Africa, that your official visit here is going to trigger reactions? Well, I would understand that if I came for electoral purposes, if that was the objective of my trip, but it is not. There are no bilateral commitments. What we're going to do during my official visit to Libreville in Gabon is an international endeavor, which is consistent with what we defended in the different COPs, including the one in Montreal, and to do so in a country that is concerned that we're placing in a position of leader. Look at the past few decades. We took many decisions for forests. We did so in Northern America. We can carry on deciding about the future of primary forests, whether in Southeast Asia or in the River Congo Basin or in the Amazon. But I think it's better to do so with the stakeholders on location. So this is the reason for which I'm coming on an official visit with a delegation to your country in a few days' time. It's our focus on forests to fight deforestation, the loss of biodiversity, and forest degradation, because the pressure on primary forests is increasing, on tropical forests is increasing. So, because of the international agenda that we set up, we chose Gabon for our next official visit, and by organizing the summit in Libreville, we want to discuss the importance of tropical forests, and by associating other countries in the Congo River Basin, so that everybody can understand that is an essential element of for the planet, and it is a major carbon sink. It's also a reservoir of biodiversity that covers 250 hectares and has fantastic biodiversity treasures. We need to be proud of it. And what we want to do is to create a model which is best adapted to Africa. It is not a copy-paste of any other model on the African continent. The objective, therefore, is to develop new solutions with scientists, researchers, and you name it. For example, Gabon is a country which has managed to develop a forest management policy which is efficient by forbidding timber exports, and that pays out to the population better. So the objective, and this is why I decided to hold the summit as we committed to in Sharm el-Sheikh, is to implement the objectives set forward during the different COPs and to derive all that we can of the capital represented by these tropical forests. Of course, we can pay for reforesting in our international models, but we don't be able to. We can't be able to. We don't seem to be able to pay to preserve what we have already, and that will be one of the major axes of this summit. We want to set the parameters of a well-balanced agreement between the countries in which these forests are and the rest of the international community. So there will be a partnership for positive conservation of these forests, and it can be summed up as a contract between a country with forests, which will commit to protect its reserves of carbon and biodiversity in exchange for support from the international community. So this is what we're going to do, and that is the reason for which I will be visiting your country, and I'll be in Libreville, and that's at the core of our agenda. So we're moving forward. We're working together, and I'm not coming for electoral purposes, and we'll be talking to everybody, to all the government representatives as well as opponents. So I'll be able to push the farm agenda that we started since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. We're the first partner of agricultural training in Angola, and this is a partnership that we are going to roll out and ramp up. And after that, we will be going to Congo-Brazzaville to pay tribute to a place where our policy with Africa found its rejuvenation. And I'm going to try and develop the new direction of our policy in Africa. And then after that, we'll go to the Democratic Republic of Congo to talk about health, economic partnerships, infrastructure, tech, but also mining, culture, and defense, as we're the main partner of military training of the DRC. So, another question from Paris. Mr. President, Valérie Leroux of the AFP, you talked about reorganizing military forces in Africa. We talked about the presence of the French military in Africa that will be less visible. Could you tell us more about this less visible military presence of France? Are you going to close down military bases? Will there be less military staff? Are you going to transfer some staff from one country to another? And can you answer the following questions as well? What is your assessment of what the Wagner Group are doing in Africa? Do you think they will become active in other countries, Mali, Central African Republic? Or is the fact that they're already very busy in Ukraine limiting de facto this risk of overspill? Well, the reorganization of the military that I mentioned earlier is not a withdrawal or a disengagement. No, it will be a sharing with Africa of the military bases. You have existing military bases with hundreds of thousands of military staff, French staff. There will be a reduction in numbers, but a ramping up of the number of African military staff, which will be defined according to the modalities of the meeting that the Chief of Staff will hold with its counterparts in Africa. So the bases, military bases, will be transformed. Some will become military academies, some will become organized partnerships, some will be change, transformed, and their imprint will change. Why is it so important? Because these military bases, as they stand today, are inherited from the past, and we need to be clairvoyant, because they're a pretext for many opponents to France, are pretexts for not finding a solution to political solutions in the field. When you have a large military basis with many military staff, you think this is like a life insurance against any political problem. No, France is not a life insurance for political problems of different countries. I say so very clearly, and the role of France is not to find a solution to all of the situations in Africa that are difficult, tricky. I say so in great humility. So alongside that, we need to have a different vision of things. And our vision has changed. We've seen so in the past few months or few years. And very soon, with quite a bit of propaganda, people do finger-pointing and say, oh, that is, they are supporting the parent place. So we need to have our African partners express their own needs in terms of security and in terms of military presence, and that they describe it to us, explaining to us, and that we live up to what is required from us. So we will remain, but with a lesser imprint. But we will do more training, provide more equipment. This will be following the requests of local countries. So the military bases will not be closed down. I mean, the main ones, there will be reorganization of the bases according to the dialogue we will have with our counterparts and according to their needs. So they will be reorganized and they will become academies, military academies, or joint bases. As for the Wagner Group, this is a group of criminal mercenaries. This is how it is objectively qualified, which is considered as a life insurance for failing regimes or those who want to organize coups. So the purpose of this group is to protect failed regimes or organizers of military coups and to have behavior of predators on mines and other resources, and to be violent against the population and to perpetrate aggressions and rapes against members of the population. So this is a philosophy that is exactly opposite to what we defend and purport. And I consider that the role which is ours is to provide a credible solution in line with the agenda I expressed early on. And my conviction is that different African states which have chosen to go for this short-term solution will end up doing away with it. Thank you.
New question, video conference. Good morning, Simon Le Baron for France Inter. You started by saying that competition today on the African continent was something outdated, while in what you said, giving the feeling that you want to participate in this competition, you said you have to accept that France has interest on the African continent, and you are asking the heads of companies to go fight for markets. Your positioning today of flagged humility is that of pragmatism, saying given the anti-French sentiment that the Gabonese journalist just spoke about, and given the place of countries like China or Russia in that region of the world, is it not just pragmatic to say France is not able today to have a place of choice in this competition? Answer: to be no misunderstanding, the competition that I don't want to participate in is that of the logic of power and military deployment. That is what I evoked in the beginning. Consistent in making Africa a reserved space. When there's a problem, you militarize it, and being present is just deploying one's army and interfere. I totally accept the fact that we have to defend our interests and participate in the educational, agricultural, etc., and the economic offer. It's positive, peaceful, offering a future for African peoples. And but it is totally pragmatic, as you said, because I try to be lucid. There is a disappointment in France. There is a disappointment because maybe we let people believe that we alone were going to resolve the problem of terrorism on the African continent. I honor myself with the fact that as of 2013, we played a role that no other non-African country has ever played. Oh, no other. It is our pride, and that is why I always be angry in front of public opinions, leaders, journalists who criticize France on this, because our children died in Africa to fight against terrorism there. But it wasn't France alone that could fight against terrorism on the African continent. So there was disappointment. But because there's a kind of misunderstanding. If the African governments don't play their role, if in a way they transfer everything to the French military presence, we'll never get there. We let this idea thrive that France was responsible for everything. And so when there's a disappointment, then logically people come to us saying it's your fault. No, it's not our fault, because it's not in in our place. And that's a reality. It's pragmatism, but it's putting things at the right level. We have a responsibility. Sometimes we accept upon the request of sovereign countries to commit because we consider that it is in our interest and our duty, what we did in 2013, because we continued. But we're not responsible for everything, and that logic is an impossible logic. And so this disappointment is nourished by this, and I totally accept the pragmatism, which is the discourse of truth of what France can do. Neither Russia or China did what they want. They didn't, make them believe that they would resolve the problems and resolve terrorism. Some make promises in terms of economic, and they'll be disappointing, and the others make promises to the junta, military junta, to protect them. And then there's manipulation behind this, where many big powers have used this context to spoil France's image. And so we have to respond by acting very concretely and very pragmatically, by fighting against counter-truths at every level, and by being very clear on the objectives that we are pursuing and what we do. I think there's another question by video conference again. Osman Vier, TV5 World, TV5 Monde. Mr. President, you spoke about the speech of Ouagadougou, which led to the reform of the CFA franc. You're proposing the same today to change the name, go further. But the CFA franc of Central Africa was not reformed. Do you think, or do you wish a process of reform of similar kind as the CFA franc in Western Africa? Another question. This is your second visit in Central Africa after Cameroon. Does that mean that Central Africa is the priority of your second term of office in terms of your African policy? For your second question, this is a region which is going through crises, difficult crises, and we must not stave them away. And in the face of the biodiversity and climate crisis, which are a security crisis, which is at the same time a source of extraordinary opportunity, and on which I had less gone to during my first term of office, so I accept this emphasis, as you say. But I wanted to travel to the whole of the continent and even go to countries, even if it may seem surprising, where no president of the French Republic had gone. Kenya, for example, imagine. So I will continue to go everywhere in Africa, but I do accept this point. Now, on the currency, regional currency, I am totally available and ready to make the same advances. But it must come from the initiative of the monetary authorities and the government of the region. And obviously, it has to have an objective, namely to strengthen the autonomy and to maintain stability. It is for them to assess it and make proposals, but I've always been available to do so, which led to the reform of the CFA franc that I had carried out during my travels to Côte d'Ivoire, and which had allowed us to carry on with these evolutions. But a lot still remains to be done, because we must now seize this opening with that apparitions seen as blocking points. And so, yes, to do it in the region, it's in the hands of the states and the monetary and financial authorities. Thank you. We're going to take a question from the lady from the delegation. Mr. President, you are going to start a step in Brazzaville dedicated to memory and culture. I would like to know whether the question of the necklace of the King Makoko will be discussed with your exchanges with President Denis Sassou Nguesso. It can very much be part of our discussion. As I said, this is part of the subjects on which we have demonstrated our openness, and over and beyond on a case-by-case approach, we wish to structure an overall policy. So I'm ready to talk about it, yes. Yes, sir, please. President from Qatar, a military partnership, concretely, how do you translate this? Military bases, that of Djibouti, which is the oldest one in the region. Are we going to give up this kind of strategy which would defend the military interests of France But how? What is the strategy to be adopted to create new partnerships with Africa? Second question with regard to Morocco. The relations are tense and even complicated at the moment. Your visit, which was programmed normally for April, we learned that maybe it will be cancelled, might be cancelled. With the Algerian neighbors, the relations are not any better despite the recent improvements. Things are not doing well, are they? Thank you. Thank you for that little note of hope. Thank you for this little note of hope. Well, it allows me to say that Djibouti is not within the framework of the operations that I was talking about, given the specificity of that base. And it's also because it is there within the framework of our Indo-Pacific strategy and not African strategy. But very concretely, this means that the bases that we have, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, you have several hundreds of, even thousands of military men. So I'm going to say, what do you need, and then associate more military personnel here and there, regional centers, develop regional centers, and us reduce our imprint, respond to needs, but strengthen training and have more local army military staff, build regional hubs, associate partners in the regions. Let me take a simple example. To fight against the extension of terrorism in the Gulf of Guinea and the sub-region, there's an initiative called the Accra Initiative, which is a very good thing. Now, if we want to structure it, these countries of the region must work better together, must develop, shared military culture. One can very well imagine that our bases contribute to this, allowing somebody in Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, or elsewhere to propose to the partners of the Accra Initiative, several countries, to come and train the military staff. The request must come from the African countries. You then asked me a question on Morocco and Algeria. One of our big writers, major writers who wrote a lot on Algeria than Morocco, wrote a lot on Sisyphus. I like to quote him, you have to imagine Sisyphus as being happy. That's the role of a French president when it comes to the region. I try to re-engage with the maximum amount of sincerity, things in the same way. That is to say, in a pragmatic manner with the civil societies. The dialogue of the two banks. France is undoubtedly the country in the world where there's a maximum Northern African diaspora. And if the Maghreb is a geopolitical reality, it's undoubtedly in France that it comes more than to the regions when I see the relations of one with the other. And then my will is to advance with Morocco. His Highness Morocco knows this, and relations are amicable, friendly, and that will continue. Some people try to, talk about scandals, European Parliament, telephone tapping. Is that was done by the government of France? No. Has France, fanned the embers? No. And so we have to advance despite these polemics. Our youth needs for us to build projects and move forwards. And as for Algeria, I know I can count on the President Tebboun's friendship. We've moved forward. There's a polemic concerning the return to France of a Franco-Algerian from Tunisia, with a lot of things that have been rumors. The whole discourse has been built. A lot of people. It's in the interest of many people who don't want things to improve, but they have a very simple message. I will continue. This is not the first problem I've seen many others, but one must continue humbly, pragmatically. We've done a lot of work on memory, and we will continue to do so with our youth. We did major work economically and militarily, and for the first time since 1962, we have last August in Algeria had a meeting with the two presidents, the ministers of defense, the chief of army staffs. The chief of army staff of Algeria came to France for the first time since 1962 to Paris. These are signs. There's a youth that in France and in Algeria wants us to do more on culture, on sports, on the economy. They want academic exchanges that are strengthened, and we'll work on that. And then there's the question of mobility. Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs has entrusted a mission on the question of visas so that we have a policy which is clearer, stronger, because I think we have to really, accept a discourse on these subjects and the fight against clandestine immigration, illegal immigration, but that must not impact students, artists, families that have shared destinies. So we've got to organize ourselves better. We will forge ahead. The period is not the best, but that will not stop me in any way.
Thank you very much to all of you. This brings us to the end of a press conference. And thank you very much to all those who will be traveling with me to Africa. And thank you to those of you in Libreville. I think Luanda, Kinshasa, and Brazzaville are also connected online.